We're going to start the next session, which is devoted to another pillar. This time it's the planet. The session is called Lifestyles for a Greener and More Sustainable Emerging Europe. Let me invite my speaker, because I'm going to be joined by three speakers in a moment. Let me invite the first one, Anna Grabowska, who is with us here.
Hi, Andrew. Okay, this way.
So I am joined by Anna Grabowska, Vice President of the Management Board for Consumer Strategies and Chief Commercial Officer at Żabka. And the other two panelists that are with me virtually are Rina Badiani Magnusson, who is Program Leader, Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions Practice Group at the World Bank, who at the last minute stepped in for Anna Bjerde, who is the Vice President of the World Bank, who cannot join us today. And we are also joined by Andreas Beckmann, Regional CEO at WWF in Central and Eastern Europe. Welcome to the Future of Emerging Europe Summit. So we've been talking about COVID a little bit, and I would like to refer to that just a tiny bit at the very beginning of our session. Can you tell us how, in your opinion, the COVID pandemic has changed our habits towards, obviously, our sustainable lifestyles? Have you noticed anything? Obviously, things like the future of work, and there's been a lot of changes there. But when it comes to our habits to create a sustainable lifestyle, and I'll start with Anna, who is here with me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation, Andrew. I think COVID influenced everything, yes. I think we talked about the healthcare at the beginning. I would say that COVID influenced the way the customer shopped a bit. Mm-hmm. Yes, so we see a movement towards proximity, so small stores nearby as well as online. That's a big shift. I think the frequency of shopping changed a bit, and the basket increased. So rarely, but spend more. But coming back to sustainable lifestyle, we all have masks and we throw them away. Yes, and that's a pile of pollution everywhere. Something that is very visible. Yes, that people started not to take care about the waste so much.
Mm-hmm. Rina, how do you see that impact of COVID on our sustainable lifestyles?
This is a fantastic question, and actually I think I could drone on for a good 40 minutes on it, but I won't. At the World Bank, we've been doing a lot of monitoring of COVID, not just from the economic and the sort of inequality perspective, how it's been affecting communities, but also behavioral responses, in part to support behavioral responses that are proactive in supporting the virus, reduction of virus transmission, but also to help support the vaccine programs, for example, looking at vaccine hesitancy. It's clear our behaviors have been fundamentally impacted by the actions that our society is taking to reduce transmission, whether they be lockdowns or reduction in social transmission. Of course, that affects the way that we live. It's affecting our living standards. It affects the interactions that we have, and it affects our purchases. So early in the COVID crisis, you definitely saw an impact on consumption and travel. But the question is, how will people come out of this crisis? Will they be resuming their old habits of traveling at speed and of consuming in some unsustainable way, or will this period of introspection have shifted us? We speak a lot of the recurring, the travel boom coming out of COVID, which doesn't speak well, but it has been a period of introspection, and people have been looking at their lifestyles and their housing patterns. I see that people are investing more in renovation. We were not expecting our renovation wave program that we're supporting in Poland to continue unperturbed, but in fact, demand has increased as people realize that the house that you live in, you invest in, and you support your thermal comfort, also reducing your environmental footprint. So to take up the theme of the previous speakers, I'm also optimistic that sustainability can be embraced in the pandemic recovery period.
So I understand we have started thinking about our lifestyles, reflecting on our lifestyles because of COVID. Andreas, what have you noticed in that area?
I would just echo what has been said, but on the, maybe build on the introspection. I think that's certainly something that we have seen, certainly with myself and the people around me. Just the look for deeper values, realizing how precarious our current situation is, and making the connection between, on the one hand, the COVID pandemic and the sudden disruptions in supply chains and lifestyles and everything, and making the connection actually to the much bigger challenge that is facing us, which is climate change, biodiversity loss, especially. So actual challenges that are facing us in terms of the future of our civilization, the future of our well-being. The pandemic is very serious. It's a serious wake-up call. And I think, at least for some people, it's been taken as a wake-up call for the much bigger challenges that are facing, the longer-term overarching challenges. Maybe I can just add one more thing. The other thing that we've noticed is the look for the connection to nature. So, I think everywhere you saw this kind of streaming of people. If they could actually get out of their houses, of course, but where they could get out of their houses, there was a lot more people going out into nature and experiencing nature, and realizing what they have with that. That's something as a nature conservation organization. That's certainly something that we have experienced. And then finally, the willingness of people, I think, in line with that, looking at something deeper. The willingness of people to support efforts in that direction. So I've been seeing it with my own organization. We expected, we had some dire predictions of, a crash in fundraising. We were quite surprised and pleasantly surprised that actually it hasn't been a crash, and in some cases it's even been increasing, as people, I think, realize, despite the difficulties that many people are obviously having, but that they need to invest in the future.
Anna touched on pollution, and this has been one of the results of the pandemic. But pollution and fossil fuels. This is something that has been in our region, quite a big of a problem for quite some time already. And how I would like us to be a little bit more, bold in a way, a bit more visionary here. How we've been trying to address this issue for quite some time now. What should we do now to make sure that we work on decreasing the amount of pollution and the use of fossil fuels in emerging Europe? I don't know who would like to take that question. It's an open one, but...
Can I maybe presage?
Sure. Yeah.
Start with that. I don't want to take it. Just to take a step before that. I think in Central and Eastern Europe, there's a common attitude that I often come across, in that that climate change, biodiversity, environment more generally, is less relevant for the region, both in terms of impact and also in terms of action. So even where people admit that there is a problem, and they often still see it as quite far away, and I don't see how that is possible at this point, given 50 years of overwhelming scientific evidence, and then increasingly the evidence that we see in terms of droughts, in terms of flooding, also in our own region. But even where people admit that there is a problem, they often say, well, there's more pressing issues that need to be addressed first. We need to catch up to the West in terms of economic development, and then we can address those concerns. But that is wrong. Climate change and biodiversity loss is already happening, impacting our region. And we also cannot afford not to take action, also in our region. And I think it's also important to note, first of all, we simply don't have the time, but also, just as importantly, we need to recognize that we need an entirely different kind of economy and society in future, like it or not. It's coming. And either we get on with it and we invest in that future, or if we keep on investing in the past, we're in a sense investing in past structures rather than looking forward. It's exactly the wrong way. We need to jump ahead of the curve, to use imagination, to use vision, to see where we need to be in the future, rather than where we should have been, maybe 100 years ago.
But you said that it's not really it's not something you can explain. But it seems that it is really true that a lot of governments in our regions just don't see that problem. And can we try to find out the reason behind that? I mean, you said that yes, there is a pressure for more growth, but at the same time, you know, we all see that the climate change is, or a catastrophe actually here, is around the corner. Anna?
Probably I will not answer why government don't see it, as you know. It probably is not my job here. But I can give you a perspective, and a bit I disagree with Andreas. I feel like new generation, you know, employees, customers, co-workers, they all see the, you know, urgency in fighting back the climate change. And I'm, you know, being a commercial person, cooperating closely with FMCG companies, I think there is a lot of dialogues, and not only dialogues, but, you know, clearly actions taken. Yeah, maybe there are small steps. Maybe truly government, you know, should, you know, take big and bold moves. But when it comes to business, I see like there is a momentum, and, you know, a lot has happening.
So business has taken the lead, basically, in your opinion?
I think I can just, you know, give you 1 hour, you know, a long list examples of what we've done together. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Rina, how do you see that by, you know, when looking at what individual countries in our region are doing?
So let me come in with a view that sits between the two. I do see substantial demand from populations, in particular from youth, has signaled that we recognise the urgency, and the European Green Deal is an example of this. The EU has made clear and bold policy and financial commitments to decarbonisation, climate resilience, natural resource protection, and social inclusion. And this raises the sustainable policy ambition, and it maps out this whole of economy and whole of society approach to lighten the environmental footprints. But taking the theme of this panel of how different sectors and segments need to come together in order to enact change, I think this is really quite fundamental. When you've got societal challenges that are so steep, like in the European and Central Asia region we have, which is the region I work in, 10 of the world's 20 most carbon-intensive countries in the world found. You've got these entrenched climate issues that cut across sectors. So you've got air, water, forests, natural resources that are being depleted at huge rates. 1 in 8 deaths in Europe is attributable to air pollution. So how do the different actors come together? Obviously you need the public support, but you need the financial instruments, you need the institutions and long-term vision, you need the price signals and the incentives that then direct the private sector and consumers towards good choices. You need those things to come together in order to enact change. I've got a couple of examples for you, I won't give them to you now, but of how we've been trying to do this. And finally, if I can rest on this point, one has to consider the inclusion dimensions to the transition to protecting our natural environment. If one is unable to protect populations from falling into energy poverty as one takes the climate transition, if it results in social exclusion, this of course tears its social fabric. It means that you can't move with the social contract intact, which has to be fundamental. One has to move with a social contract that's already established towards a new societal equilibrium. And that of course entails an all-of-society approach.
Mm-hmm. And I remember speaking to the CEO of a energy company, a startup actually, and he was saying that, you know, it seems that we're not doing enough, but actually there's, like Anna said, the private sector is doing a lot. Have you noticed any specific examples of amazing actions, you know, taken to protect the environment in the energy sector that you would like to share here? Rina, Andreas, you must be noticing good examples every now and then, at least.
I can't point to specific companies, but there's a lot of investment going into renewables, also into energy efficiency. I mean, the region as a whole tends to be still relatively energy inefficient, certainly compared to its Western neighbors. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and lots of companies going in there. So if I could just come back to what I said before, I didn't want to create the impression that that it's all doom and gloom. And I totally agree with Anna that there is a lot of bright lights, a lot of forward action, but of course there is the other side as well. For me, some of the more interesting cases have been where you actually have this interaction between civil society groups, often working together with the private sector, and often you can no longer, I think, or increasingly it's impossible to talk about discrete sectors because they are growing into each other to a significant extent. And I think that's where there's a lot of the innovation that's coming out of to address these problems. So yeah, certainly. If there's not government leadership, and I think in many cases the political leadership has been very poor. There's also been from a lot of economic actors poor leadership, but at the same time, fortunately and increasingly, there's a lot of energy, ideas, and I think that's where the hope comes from, the opportunity comes from. Because, it's recognized that any massive challenge requires a massive solution, and any solution brings with it the potential for a good business case. So it makes good business sense to offer solutions to the world's problems.
I can give you one nice example, which probably you'll find tangible. So, Żabka, we opened one store. We have 7,500 stores in Poland, but we opened one which we call like laboratory, and it's like all the innovation from different areas, but also this energy innovation, we put together into one like kind of laboratory. So this store is in Warsaw. It is fully supported by green energy. It has solar panels. There is a windmill that produces energy, but we also have innovations like special dots in the windows that collects the solar energy. There is a kinetic floor, so the customers by walking they create energy. There is a lot of efficiencies to reduce the energy used by chillers, etc., etc.
Well, one of the nominees at the Emerging Europe Awards is a company, again a startup, energy startup that sells only. The only energy they sell is produced from green sources. So they made it particularly clear that they're not, going for any other source. One question here about people's awareness as far as energy is concerned, and also, the use of carbon fuels. How do you think we should increase that awareness going forward? An open question again to the three of you.
I think education would be the key word for me, as we need to talk about it, and starting with the young generation at schools. And I think that's the role of government, the public school system. Yes, that's one. I think the instruments from banks, the financial instruments, would be very much helpful. Yes, with the private sector, we committed to 100% green energy for our company. We have our offices green. We have some part of our distribution centers green. But in order to really transform into fully green energy, it requires a lot of changes. And also financial instruments, as at the moment, buying black energy is cheaper. Yeah. So, and from the profitability point of view, we need to be somehow encouraged.
Rina, Andreas.
Okay. If I could jump on that, obviously, the role of the state, of the government, of the school systems. There is a lot. There's certainly a role of civil society organizations. But I think there's also a role for the private sector as well. As the private sector moves into the future, there's a role also for awareness and education through their channels. An example, maybe a little bit similar to what Anna mentioned, we're now working with Tesco in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia, and looking at how we can decrease the ecological footprint of the average shopping basket. One way to do that is to work with the supply chain to improve the environmental performance of the supply chain. But another one is to try to help people choose more sustainable options, awareness, education. And then the next step also helping to educate governments with advocacy, lobbying, to make sure that we have a responsive, supportive, legislative policy framework in place that can support these kinds of sustainable options. Again, it's not about idealism from a business perspective. It's really about hard-nosed self-interest. It's about making sure that we have a sustainable future.
I can answer. Yes, as private sector was mentioned. Yes, so we as a company we promised to create conditions for sustainable lifestyle, sustainable living for everyone every day. And for us it's important because 2.5 million customers visit us every day. So whatever we put on shelves will resonate this way or the other with mass audience. Yes, not even talking about entrepreneurs, suppliers, employees. Yes, but to change the customer lifestyle is something that we are truly committed. Yes. And one of the examples was that we launched, together with other businesses like Cooperative Solution, a 100% plant-based brand. It is called Plant Hunter. We work together with some NGOs, but also big companies like Unilever with their startup, to really have substitutes for meat and for dairy products. Yes? And we launched it big time to our shelves, yes, to every single store, to give people choice. And people know that meat is very high in terms of carbon footprint production, and alternative are better for the planet, for animals, for us, for health as well. So I think that's the role of private sector too, yes, to change hearts and minds of whoever we serve.
I think before I let Rina relate to that, I just want to give you a perspective. If you are in Warsaw, for example, in the city of Warsaw, and you go out basically, you can find a Żabka store, literally a few actually, on the same street. So when you put something out on the shelf, it doesn't really resonate with the people because the stores are not that enormous, but at the same time, you can clearly see what products are being disposed. I wanted to touch on that, and I will continue with the habits in a second. But I want Rina to respond to Andreas's previous thought and also Anna's.
So I actually will take you in the direction of the psychology and the habit formation if you want, because I think this is a fundamental aspect. It's beyond awareness. It's about translating awareness and habits into action that is recurrent and continuous. So that's a sort of lifestyle shift that continues. Making people aware of what they could be doing better is not the same thing as them choosing to do better. And so one has to look at the entire element of human psychology to think how people make their choices, and I love the examples from Żabka of how they do that, of considering of how people relate to products and informing them of the better choices that could be made. We tend to take a behavioral lens when we design projects, considering the interaction between the consumer, if you want, or the recipient, and it could be the private sector agent, it could be the government, it could be a different entity, and considering how they are interacting to make changes that are different. To give you an example, when we look at the renovation wave work that we've been doing in Poland, we looked at the supply side actors and we said, do they have everything that they need in order to properly convey the information on the renovation wave that's coming to the people that want to change their heat sources? Are they adequately steering the direction of house owners in order to help them to make choices that are environmentally friendly? So it requires building awareness not just at the consumer level, but across different actors, and then translating it to continuous shifts. And one thing we've been trying to do is to work with, if you want, behavioral units or labs that think, how does one translate this into habit formation?
Mm-hmm. If I could just jump on that, because I think it's more than just, and I think your point about awareness and going beyond the awareness to behavior is key. But I think there's another level above that, and that is actually understanding is a paradigm in a sense. In a sense, we still have a paradigm from the 19th century, which is in many ways binary. And what we need to shift to is a paradigm which sees everything in terms of systems. That's how our economic system works, and I think that's what has happened under COVID is a very good example of that. But it's also how our natural systems work, and understanding that all these different pieces are interconnected, and you can't just take out one without it having impact somewhere further down the line. I think for kind of a more practical way of seeing some of those, from a, let's say, public sector perspective, from a private sector perspective, is circular economy, the concept of circular economy, where you no longer you just take resources out of the ground, you use them, and then you throw them away. Now, of course, that doesn't work if you've got finite resources. So actually having a system that works in a circle. And I think those are the kinds of the concepts that are beginning to appear much more strongly also in this region, slowly but surely. And that also holds hope for new directions, because it completely changes the way you look at the world once you start looking at it that way.
So at this point, I necessarily have to mention that our badges, for example, this time has been made from recyclable materials fully. So we're getting in that direction as well. But Anna, I wanted to ask you about the habits in Poland, basically, because if with over 7,000 stores, you have to be able to see some sort of trend, and being a vegan myself, and every vegan person will always tell you at least once in their lifetime that they are vegan. So being a vegan myself, I have to ask you how those habits in Poland have changed over the last let's say over the last year.
Okay, so I will build on your habit, yes. So we clearly see that there is a movement towards vegetables and meat alternative and dairy alternative and fruits as well. On the other side, there is a huge trend towards convenience. So people are not ready to prepare meals, to make the smoothies at home, etc., etc. Yes. Free time is a value above the others, yes. So what we see that once you put, a nice product like those, vegetables and fruit smoothies, and there are no sugar, no salt, no preservatives, people will buy them because they know, okay, it's good for me, good for my health, yes. They wouldn't consider, this product before, but given them a choice, I think it will trigger their mind. And there is a strong trend towards flexitarianism. So people don't like to be called vegan or vegetarian, and we try to avoid even such stamp,
labeling, yes.
Labeling like this. I'm flexitarian, so I'll try to avoid or reduce amount of meat or dairy I consume. But from time to time, I would eat a good steak. Yes, maybe tonight. Why not?
Well, in Brussels, what is really famous are mussels. So.
Okay. So I was joking, obviously. So flexitarianism, that's a growing trend. So it is like, being aware of what I eat, how can, my diet be better. The other point that we see, within our group, we also, apart from stores, we have also Matchfit, who is the leading dietary provider, as well as we have the biggest in Poland marketplace for dietary catering. Probably it is not known to everybody, but there is a solution in Poland that you got your 5 meals a day packed in a bag and delivered to you, yes? And it grows enormously. So there is a trend that people don't want to throw away the waste food. They don't want, to spend time on shopping. They want, clear solutions which are convenient, but on the other side, healthy and personalized. Because this diet is, good for me. It is, for my, health or body or whatever I want to do.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to build on Andreas's point about circular economy. Have you noticed a lot of examples of that in the emerging Europe region? Positive examples.
To me?
Yes, please.
There's lots of. There's a whole landscape of initiatives that are bubbling up. We have a cooperation with the impact hubs. It's a network of you could say incubators around Central and Eastern Europe and beyond. So we've been working with them and putting on events, and it's just immense. I mean, incredible the amount of initiatives that are bubbling up. So those are the ones that the ones that you probably don't hear about yet, but will be making headlines perhaps 5 years from now. And I think that's exactly it. So we need the big companies, the IKEAs and so on, to go in the direction of circular economy. That's important. But we also need all of those bottom-up solutions because it is clear we are facing such massive challenges to the future of our civilization that we need to have everybody involved at all levels and in all different ways. And so, and there again, I'm very optimistic when I see that.
Mm-hmm. Rina, anything to add here at this point before I ask a different question?
Sure, we've actually got quite a lot of work emerging on circularity, including not just considering the different instruments and the differential impact of policy instruments to achieve targets, but also the distributional impacts of this, like including actually on the labor market side, not just on how one more appropriately has the resource efficiency targets and implements them, but the knock-on effects that one may not anticipate of the circularity of policies, and then the mitigating policies that one can take in order to support these actually moving forward.
Can I add just one thing, Andrew?
Sure.
I think it's really important. I mean, circular economy, fantastic concept because it really can push things forward and look at suddenly waste is an input to the system. It's not waste. At the same time, though, I think, and it's got a lot of pickup in the private sector, especially, and that's great. At the same time, it often becomes kind of licensed to just keep the same business model, essentially. So you have recycling. That means we can produce even more, and it ignores the bigger picture, the actual planetary boundaries. So in a sense, what is important is that you look at the circular economy within the broader. The truly circular economy, which is the planet. Otherwise, you have situations like, okay, you can cut down a tree and replant the tree, and you can say that is circular. You've replanted that, there's a circle there. But if you cut down too many trees, then we'll lose all of these other services, so the biodiversity, the water regulation, the clean air, the oxygen production, et cetera, which is also important. So you crowd out those other services. So we can't just look at the small picture, the small circle. It has to be consistent within the bigger picture. And that's, frankly, missing in the debate so far.
Anna?
Yeah, I see a lot of innovation as well as partnership in the circularity area. A lot of initiatives. What I would say that, there is a missing point of a kind of countrywide system of collecting, packaging. Mm-hmm. Plastic would be an example, or aluminum would be an example, yes. Initiatives on the final product, there are plenty of them, yes. Everybody wants to have, airpet in the bottle, not only fully recyclable packaging, but the packaging that comes from recycled materials before, yes. So there is a huge demand for these, but on the other side, there is no enough kind of material recycled, collected, and be able to be used again.
So we clearly see an opportunity here. I wanted to briefly touch on travel as well, because last year at some point in April, all the airlines and planes really stopped and were not moving for several months. But now we recently heard Michael O'Reilly, the guy behind the biggest airline in Europe, saying that or Ryanair is going to come back to the pre-COVID capacity. How do you think, or is there anything we can do in this area to create or to make our lives more sustainable in a way? And again, an open question to the three speakers.
If I could just jump on that, I think the key is the key is taxing carbon. We need we need the system to give the right incentives. And whether O'Reilly's got the biggest airline or not, I frankly don't care, as long as it delivers what we need it to deliver in terms of sustainability. That it doesn't undermine what we have. So I think that's in the end what it comes down to. We need to have that system providing, rather so that it's not a question of idealism, but it's just a question of pragmatism.
I fully concur with Andreas's point. Currently, the environmental footprint of these flights is simply not being taken into account. And until the market value reflects this environmental value, we will continue to have an overconsumption. And therefore, the taxing carbon in a way that makes the users, those taking the flights, cognizant of the full cost of their decision will not have changed. No amount of awareness or raising will match the impact of a carbon tax on this.
I should say I didn't take a Ryanair flight to get to this event. So.
Yes, I would add that the COVID shouldn't be wasted. Good crisis shouldn't be wasted, yes. And I think that it was a very tough lesson, but for many of us, we started to work remotely, and I think we should consider it. Why to come back to the previous habits? Yes, I think conferences, webinars. I think. Good example of working or being remotely. Although I also like the physical touch and networking. Yes, so I think we need to balance. But I think there is a lot of opportunity to use these lessons from COVID.
But I think it's hard to resist when you for example need to travel and there's a flight ticket that is actually cheaper and it seems that the prices are not really that different from before COVID. Anyway, I wanted to ask you the very last question, each of you. If you were to give, all the stakeholders involved in creating sustainable and greener lifestyles in emerging Europe, some advice, what they should focus on in particular to make sure that the region is making a huge step forward in resolving that issue, what would that be?
Maybe we start. I mean, I think that the key challenge for Central and Eastern Europe is the lack of vision, imagination, confidence, and cooperation. It's not a question of resources and so on. And I mean, you just need to look at history to see that. But it's really being able to actually look ahead and have the confidence to actually act and to dream and to see what is needed in the future rather than what is in the past, and then actually being able to do that together. And unfortunately, there's often a difficulty in having different people, sectors, whatever, working together. The biggest hope that I see is those cases where actually different people from different walks of life, different countries, and different sectors. I mean, some of the most interesting stuff that we are doing is in cooperation with the private sector. In the past, we were at odds with each other, and now we're looking for solutions together. And that's really where it gets really exciting because that's then it actually has practical results, and at the same time, it's driving in the right direction. So I'm optimistic from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Rina?
You can never get a one-handed economist, so I'm going to use both my hands and give two answers. I think I mentioned earlier the institutions, incentives, inclusion, input efficiency, innovation, investment. That's 6. But if I can hang on institutions, the strategic and long-term planning, this transparent and stable law with regulations and enforcement that back this vision, that is the long-term guiding visionary approach of central government, but also actors working together towards a common goal that one cannot go without, absolutely not without. But that does not mean the other actors do not have an important and fundamental role to play. It just means that you need that strategic, long-sighted approach in order to inform change. But the second part, I would like to come back to this point on incentives. Currently, our market values are not fully internalizing the incentives. And as such, our private sector is not getting the right signals, our consumers are not getting the right signals, and our policies and protection mechanisms are not built around the changes that need to happen. That has to happen, that has to shift. We actually have a report coming out on this, the regular economic report, which discusses carbon taxes through the lens of, okay, how does one shift these in an inclusive manner towards long-term sustainability ambitions? So without these institutions and without these incentives, it's hard to see how one can have this long-term structural shift.
And I think advice from my side would be like, think about avalanche, yes, private sector, the banks, the institution, the NGOs. I think we can work together, and everybody makes something small, but together is huge. So small steps, but every single day, and I would say act rather than just talk, and lead by example, and then we will have a huge avalanche, the positive one.
So the public, the private, and the non-governmental sector working together without waiting, actually doing things as soon as possible, and not talk too much. Thank you very much for joining me for this session today.